Thank you for joining us in our program. I am Armando F. Sanchez, and I am wonderful. I feel great. I have the thrill and the honor of having three wonderful individuals who have, before we started the show, helped me to soothe myself. We had some technical issues, which I caused. And we immediately jumped in and they helped me with that. So I want to thank all of them for that. So it does work. What they do, it does work. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Dr. Poets and other healers. And I'm going to have Thelma T. Reyna, Golden Foothills Press, put out this outstanding book, share with us what we're going to do in today's show. And again, helping with stress, even on the technical side. You guys have been really helpful. And I'm sure this is going to be very profound to help many people around the world in the medical field. With that, Thelma T. Reyna.
Thank you very much, Armando. And thank you for inviting the three of us co-editors of this amazing book. It was just such an honor for me to collaborate with Dr. Frank L. Meyskens, Jr., an oncologist and a longtime professor at UCI Irvine. I'll tell you a little bit more about him and his file. And to collaborate with Dr. Johanna Shapiro, a psychologist and also a superstar. So let me tell you a little bit first about the book and why we're here. And then I'd like to tell you about Dr. Meyskens. And we're going to go by first names. We're just going to say Frank, Johanna, Thelma, and Armando. Last year, we were working on a major project that the two of them have had for a number of years at UC Irvine. It is an annual symposium of hope and healing, and it utilizes poetry as a major means and inspiration for dealing with grief and loss and hope and healing. So I was fortunate to get to know Dr. Meyskens and Dr. Shapiro, Frank, Johanna. And through that association, when we were working on the February 2022 symposium, that was a very big success. The year before that, when we were working on it, we were having to recruit writings. We decided that we were going to reach out to various sources and recruit poetry, essays, creative writings from healthcare professionals, from medical doctors, nurses, psychologists, the whole spectrum of medical healthcare professionals. And that we were going to put these submissions into an anthology to serve three purposes: to help us put them on the stage at the symposium in February, number one, to be able to have a book that showcases their writing and their experiences in the healthcare field, and hopefully to use it moving forward as medical students are trained. So Dr. Poets and Other Healers is a result of those plans, and it is a result of Frank and Johanna and I, and with the team that we were working on that symposium. It is a result of those writings that came together. Now, these writings, I'd like to just share a little bit from the back cover of the book. Year 2, COVID-19. The pandemic continues to rage worldwide, with the loss of human life in the US alone surpassing 800,000 in less than 24 months. And keep in mind, audience, that the loss of American lives is now closer to 1 million. But at this time, this was what it was. So the losses are raging, but the heroism and devotion of US healthcare workers stands strong, despite burnout, despite assaults by virus deniers, anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, despite purveyors of misinformation that have hobbled our nation's recovery. In this anthology, 26 poets and essayists, physicians, nurses, psychologists, as I've mentioned, share their personal experiences tending to patients dealing with loss, uncertainty, grief, and isolation, surviving in a world turned topsy-turvy by a once-in-a-century pandemic, surviving through resilience, selflessness, and the eternal flame of hope. So all the writings here, 51 total works, poems, and personal essays, were written by these healthcare professionals, medical people, sharing with us their experiences in the second year of COVID. I would like to tell you a little bit about Frank and Johanna, and so you can understand why they are perfect for having done this project here. Dr. Frank L. Meyskens, Jr., MD, FACP, is the Distinguished Professor of Medicine Emeritus and founding director of the Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of California in Irvine. Since 2001, Frank has helped develop the field of end-of-life medicine. He is internationally known for his poetic contributions as well, and co-editorship of a column in Oncology Times titled Poetry for Cancer Caregivers Symposium. And now let me tell you a little bit about Johanna Shapiro. She is a PhD, and she is Professor Emerita of Family Medicine and the founder director of the program in Medical Humanities and Arts at UC Irvine School of Medicine, including, she is a recipient, by the way, she is a recipient of many teaching awards and honors at UCI, including the Outstanding Faculty Achievement Award. So our congratulations for their achievements and our wonderful welcoming here to Johanna Shapiro and Frank L. Meyskens. And together we're going to talk about this book. You need to hear it from them. And I'm going to go ahead and throw out a question right now. And I'm going to just throw it out at one, but the other one, please answer. Tell our audience very briefly how it is that three of us, I am not in the medical field at all. I'm a retired school administrator, and I am an author, a poet, and an indie publisher, but I know nothing of medicine and have never been involved in the medical field. And yet here I was collaborating with these two superstars in the medical field. So Johanna, tell us a little bit about how we got together and what we talked about when we got together.
Well, thank you so much, Thelma, for such a generous introduction. And I'm happy to reflect on the serendipity of our all coming together. As you mentioned, Frank and I had worked for the past 4 years on a symposium of poetry of hope and healing, because he and I share this vision that poetry is essential for patients and for doctors and nurses and everyone in the health professions, because it enables people to access thoughts and emotions that are sometimes otherwise hard to articulate and even hard to identify. So we started this symposium, and then it was Frank who discovered you and your marvelous poetry. You know, as you well know, we invited you for the 4th annual symposium as one of our 2 keynote speakers. And we were so impressed. We loved your poems, which had to do a lot with loss and grief, which are obviously themes that occur regularly in medicine and healthcare. We just thought you were a beautiful poet, and we thought that your perspective as a poet would contribute greatly to the symposium. So that's how you came to be a co-organizer. And then I'll let Frank talk, and you as well, because I think we all played a role in reaching out to potential contributors to this work.
Frank.
Well, the contributors to this work expanded all of California and outside of there. In fact, the keynote speaker for our 5th annual Healing and Hope, which we had with you, was from the Midwest, and was a nurse, actually. And that was a first for our conference. But I believe initially we sent messages to all of the cancer centers and other mechanisms we have to communicate with in California. And there are many, of course, and over 200 poets registered their poems in various shapes and forms. and well, perhaps close to 300 poems. I may be exaggerating, but it was close to that. Then we were faced with the problem or issue of how we were going to get that down to a manageable level. And we went through an exhaustive review, which I'll not go over in detail, but it basically was a yes, no, yes, no, yes, no process. And when we finally came down to the ones that we wanted, we said, well, are we really going to include, this many from one person? So we limited it to 4. And there's about 5 poets who have 4 poems in this book. And that was a major limitation. A major discussion too was to how far we were going to extend into healthcare. And, so that we actually have a primitive Segura cacti, a holy person, healing from long ago in one of the poems. And we have a holistic caregiver who is not in formal medicine, but is certainly in healing. And on and on. We finally ended up with, after much work, with the anthology that you have.
Thank you very much for that. And I do want to iterate that. And in fact, this event today here is one of our very first public presentations of this book. So it's very special to us. So here we are sharing the writings of medical professionals with people with the belief that this is a very important thing to do. And Johanna, could you, as a matter of fact, tell us a little bit, if you can, about the medical humanities program that a number of universities, at least across the United States, have. What is that program, and how does that tie into this? How does that make what this book is doing extra important in the field of medicine?
Well, medical humanities, or what is often now called health humanities, exists in, I would say, the large majority of US and Canadian medical schools. And in fact, you find programs in medical humanities across the world. In Germany, UK has been a leader. There are medical humanities programs in Brazil, in India, in Taiwan. So it is a widespread field about which still is very little known. So kind of an irony there. But the purpose of medical or health humanities is manyfold. It is in part focused on curriculum in medical and nursing and other health professional schools in order to bring in the arts and the humanities and many social sciences as well in an effort to help physicians and other medical trainees really appreciate the diversity and complexity of the human condition. I think that literature and the arts is, that's really what it's all about, is to help us understand ourselves. And in the technological move toward that we see in medicine in the past half century or so, it's easy to kind of lose sight of the humanity of the patients, the humanity of their families, and the humanity of those who take care of them. So I think that the introduction of arts and humanities into medical and health professional education is an attempt to remedy that and give physicians and others a broader perspective for when they actually encounter their patients. I would like to point out that in addition to a focus on curriculum and training future physicians, there's also a robust field of research and scholarship in medical humanities.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Frank, doctors and other medical people have been writing poetry and creative work for many, many, many years, perhaps, centuries. You go back to the ancient times and you have physicians who were poets, for example. Tell us why you think it took so long for what Johanna has just described as being valued and pushed and being done in the training of our medical people. Why did it take so long for it to get to this point where it is now systematically, writing creatively by medical professionals is now systematically being addressed and nurtured? Why did it
Well, I think the major reason is because medicine was dominant. And this statement, I am the doctor, still existed early in my training. And so that to a degree, its extension beyond the doctor to other doctors did not extend. Two things that played a big role. One is that these super spreading, if you will, of the different disciplines. It's no longer just a doctor. There's all types of doctors, in addition to surgeons and medical professionals, with many, many specialties, with many, many ways of looking at the universe. And secondly, of course, is the fact that science had become so dominant and was seen as the only thing that was important. And the recognition that that it simply is not true in the care of patients. And a third and important reason is the recognition that other caregivers are very important, including, of course, nurses in our own program at UCI as an embryonic program for their nurses, and it's spreading, and caregivers at home, who are the real caregivers. And those are the ones who have to deal with the loss and the grief and everything associated with taking care of seriously ill individuals.
Johanna?
I was just going to, if I might, drill down a little bit into this issue. Obviously, medical health humanities is a very broad field. It includes writing, artistic production, performance art, and so forth. In the anthology, we've focused on writing, and I just wanted to share a few thoughts about why we have seen this proliferation in physician and to some extent other healthcare professionals' writings in the last, maybe 10, 15, 20 years or so. And I think that Frank gave some really important clues. For example, I think that there has been a trend toward the democratization, if you will, of medicine, this awareness that physicians are no longer viewed as gods, if they ever were, but that medicine increasingly, as Frank points out, is a team effort that relies on a lot of people, and that an important part of the team are the patients as well. They should be included as part of the team. I also think that there is the issue of voice. We often think that in medicine, when people become patients, which is a very constrictive term, they lose their voice. It becomes kind of subsumed within the medical record, the electronic medical record now, and what we used to call the patient chart. And so patients would feel that they kind of vanished within the process of trying to recover their health. But I think it's also true that physicians were trained in a very standardized way, which had its advantages, but also kind of made many feel that they had to conform to a certain image of the physician. And I think more recently, physicians and other health professionals want to reclaim their own voices. They want just like other human beings, they want to be seen and heard and recognized. And I think that's a big impulse of why we all write. And I think it's true for physicians as well. They want to be seen not only as doctors, but as human beings with human struggles and human griefs and human joys.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Does either one of you believe that the pandemic has stirred the medical professionals' involvement in creative writing, perhaps more than in our recollection, more than in the past 100 years? Do you believe that, Frank?
Absolutely. I mean, because I hear the pandemic forced people to stay at home and, you know, to deal with yourself or your one loved one or with your family, either the core family or extended family. And so you had to really examine what was going on in your life. And again and again and again, I heard from colleagues, you know, and at one extreme, self-examination led to suicide. At another extreme, it's led to many outpouring of poetic and essays and dealing with people in the arts beyond just writing, but in the movement. And I mean, the first signs, if you will, of healing and of treatment of damage that prevented movement was the formation of informal medicine 1,000 years ago, although it was never recognized or appreciated until recently.
Johanna?
Yeah, there's, I think, another aspect to this as well. And I certainly agree that we have seen this flowering of physicians and others expressing themselves through literature and other art forms. One thing that I think happened for physicians is that, especially at the start of the pandemic, they were struck helpless. Now, all physicians have experienced helplessness and the limits of their profession. But in general, you know, physicians know a lot about what to do when someone is sick. And they're used to feeling more or less in control, more or less having answers, more or less having ways of helping their patients. And at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, nobody in healthcare really knew what to do. And I think that was a really terrifying experience for physicians. And in the face of that helplessness, when there was at that time nothing they could do instrumentally, practically for patients, or very little. They were trying everything, as you recall. But I think that art provided a way for physicians to regain some sense of control. And as Frank is intimating, I think that for many it became a wellness practice to try to restore balance in a life that had been upended, of course, for their patients, but also for themselves.
Last question before we get to your readings, because as I've mentioned before, each of our two co-editors here is a published poet in his and her own right. Very talented. They've been doing this for a while now. We're going to get to listen to their poetry and perhaps a personal essay, perhaps from Johanna. We'll see. But before that, just one final question. Was there anything in the writings, as we were receiving these writings, and as Frank said, we were discussing them, we were voting on them, yes or no, should we include it in the book? We saw a lot. We got to express and react to a lot. But would you say that there was anything in particular that struck you as medical professionals? Did you get any new insights, revelations, any surprises from the writings that we were reading and that ultimately ended up in our book? Frank, you go first, please.
Yes, and I would simply put was the extent and degree and the depth of self-examination under which all of these individuals, whether they were physicians and nurses, other caregivers, patients, caregivers of those patients, came out with a deeper understanding of who they were in the universe. Very striking, very striking.
Thank you, Johanna.
I so agree with Frank. I wanted to point out that while some of the people represented in the anthology are true poets in their own right and have published elsewhere, some of them are not. Some of them are health professionals who simply felt the urge, maybe couldn't escape from the need to pick up a pen or put their fingers on a computer keyboard and write. And that being the case, what struck me most was how good the submissions were. And I think that comes exactly from what Frank is talking about, that because I do a lot of reflective writing with medical students, and obviously they're medical students, they're not poets or writers. And it's usually really, really good, as we discovered with the submissions in our anthology. And I think that does come in part that when people are authentically expressing their voice, what they say matters. And that's what I found with these, both the poets and the non-poets. They said things of significance in ways that were beautiful and heartbreaking and true, certainly true for themselves.
And they knew it, and they knew it, and they knew it, and it affected them deeply. And I was affected particularly by two of the individuals who I know very well from my scientific life. And I would have never guessed about some of the self-revelations that they made in their poetry. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, definitely stirs our curiosity regarding the content of this book. What are they talking about? And the fact that they are opening themselves up, as you say, self-examining and revealing things, and perhaps, as we believe, stirred greatly by the pandemic and the suffering and the immense loss that was going around. I remember hearing some medical people in my life saying that in all their entire career, they had never seen anywhere near the loss of life as they saw in just 2 years of the pandemic. And of course, we're still not out of the woods. Well, I'd like to, I'm chomping at the bit here to get to hear your writing. So who would someone like to go first? Johanna, would you like to go first?
Great. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So thanks for this opportunity. I'm going to, I hope, read two pieces. The first is called Emerging During the Pandemic. I was quarantined at home, mostly during the height of the pandemic. And like all of us, I really struggled with the isolation and the aloneness. And I hope in this work that I can engage issues of spirituality and the role that played in some of our lives, as well as the nature of community when we are all living so apart and often so divided. Emerging during the pandemic. During the past 7 months of quarantine in the coronavirus pandemic, I practically go nowhere except to my doctors and dentist. My only walking is around our neighborhood. At the end of the long, meandering street is a dead end with a vista of hills and a vast, uncluttered sky. When I reach this point, I raise my arms wide and utter the following prayer: protect your servants, help your people, save your world. Over the course of history, the Lord's servants have been a motley crew. For this reason, I want to clarify that for the purposes of this prayer, I'm referring to the essential workers and frontline doctors and nurses battling COVID-19. So I recite this prayer 3 times, each time separated by a respectful pause, which is inevitably met with silence, but it might be a divine silence, which could be replete with answers. Who knows what anything really means these days? Then I turn around and go home. Usually I'm able to indulge this practice in complete isolation because although there are houses nearby, their inhabitants never emerge. Today, however, a middle-aged man materialized heading toward his car. When he saw me, arms outstretched, he stood gawking at me like I was a crazy woman. He seemed eager to drive away, but was perhaps worried that I might attack his house or more likely curse it. "What are you doing there?" he shouted at me. "Praying," I answered calmly. It took him a moment to process this. There was no church, mosque, or synagogue in sight, no choir, no prayer books, and as far as either of us could tell, no God. He took a deep breath, looked quizzical, then slowly nodded and said, "Oh, well then, that's all right. Go right ahead." He zoomed away, both of us waving farewell. I finished my final round of supplications and walked home smiling. Prayer had never felt so neighborly, or maybe neighborliness never felt so prayerful. Who knows what anything really means these days?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johanna. It's perfect. I love that. And Frank, you're on.
There's a little backstory that I must mention that I'd been active all my career, both in the laboratory and in the clinic. But on December 6, 2019, I had to have an emergency cardiac bypass. There were a lot of complications, and I was in the inpatient service for 46 days. And when I finally woke up in October, I was greeted by COVID. And my cardiologist, the first thing she wanted to do was to test me for it. Fortunately, I was negative. To say the least, my cognitive and other physical recovery took a long time, which I'll not go into. And it was not until December of 2020, almost a year later, when my cognitive function came back well enough to be able to write poetry. And in 1 week, in the last week of December, I had a flood. And I actually wrote about 10 poems. And several of them had to do with the issue related to the whole pandemic and its effect. And the first one I'm going to read is called Connections, because it's an optimistic one, and everybody was pessimistic. Hugging, a universal gesture. When done well, like holding hands with your whole body. When done with malintent, like a punch to the gut. There is an infinite variety of hugs. There is the business hug, brief arm contact around one shoulder, a greeting familiar to all, saying, "I'm here," but nothing more. There is the faithful colleague hug, arms encircling each other, bodies facing and apart, accompanied by a smile and a brief meeting of the eyes. And then the good friend hug, a brief contact of bodies with a felt response, a peck on the cheek, a slow parting of the flesh. And unexpectedly, moments that we all remember, two bodies entangling from head to toe, leaving nothing to the imagination. And hands, two people gently holding hands while walking down the street. The caregiver softly touching the hand of a patient or a loved one, signaling kindness and love, building empathy and trust. Hugging and holding hands, two ancient forms of communication, transmitting compassion and understanding, keeping the peace, leading to healing and hope, nurturing, fostering, connecting, the chance for another day.
Thank you, Frank. Johanna?
Right, so thank you. I have one more poem here. You know, I think we can all recall that in the early days of the pandemic, physicians and nurses leaving the hospital were met with cheers and thanks and immense gratitude for all they were doing. And over the past 2 years, unfortunately for some, that has changed to animosity, hostility, even threats of violence. And of course, as someone in the health professions, this has been a source of great pain when I see colleagues assailed by patients' family members and accused of not saving their loved ones and so forth. And, you know, it's very hard when everyone has been so frightened and so angry and so helpless to see each other as humans. But this poem is an attempt to remind people that doctors have been suffering greatly during the pandemic. And so hopefully that comes across. These are your doctors. These are your doctors, drinking themselves into oblivion, jumping off rooftops, huddled, sobbing on a bridge, sinking to the floor outside their patients' rooms. They know how to choose just the right drugs to make the world disappear. They know exactly where to place the gun. They look dazed, amazed at their own fragility. They do not want to be here taking care of you. They think you are dying, and they are not, and they pity you. Pity them, your doctors. They are filled with despair that they don't recognize because they cannot even recognize your despair. See yourself in them, then maybe they will see themselves in you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Frank?
I have to give you the meaning of a word that I use in this poem, anodyne. And it was actually initially developed in response to The Economy, but then it ran, and I first saw it in The Economist, but then it became a more popular one and used in many different ways. But basically it means substitute. For example, a substitute for a medicine would be dancing or whatever you want, okay? And this is my healing anodyne. Healing is an ancient art, long practiced around the fireside in times of disease and damage, from whatever the cause therein. And we moderns find a way to enlightenment as the science unveils secrets that underlie causality, leading to drugs and other potions. As the healer in the white coat builds trust that enables me to be probed and prodded, my corporeal being aching. But when the moment became dire, your hands covered mine, and I feel you once again, my loving anodyne. Hope restored, and healing begins again. This occurred, of course, during those 46 days by my loving Linda.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank.
I was very moved by your wonderful work, literary work. I'm starting to get a deeper appreciation for the stresses that people go through, not only the patients, but also the doctors, the nurses. They have to heal themselves. The only point of reference I have, not being inside the hospital day in and day out, and it's a little bit of Hollywood. It's the TV program MASH. You may recall it was the whole tension of the Cold War, i.e. Korea, and the doctors having to figure out how to jump in, take care of the patient, move them on, take on another one, move them on, take on another one. It was becoming a factory. And then once it all stopped, it's like, how did they calm themselves? Now on the show, if I remember correctly, they helped each other out, and a lot of martinis were spilled everywhere, trying to get themselves back in their heads again before the next wave came in. So makes me appreciate the show, but at the same time, I thank the show for helping me understand what you're sharing with us about what the profession goes through. With that, take it back to Thelma as well, and I welcome your comments.
Right, and I think that is a wonderful reference point. I remember MASH very well, both the movie and the TV series, and I think that was a great example of pulling back the veil, kind of trying to show people the human experience of medicine. And nothing against martinis, they have their time and place. But, we also know, as I tried to reference in my poem, that unfortunately, alcohol and substance abuse are high in the medical profession because of the stresses. And I'd like to think that poetry and the arts offer a more benign form of wellness. And, if you think about it, it's if a physician or a nurse is stressed out, despairing, anxious, basically not a happy person, they're not going to be able to take as good care of their patients. So I think that we all benefit when doctors are happy, nurses are happy, patients are happy, even within very dire circumstances. So it's hard to do that, but good health professionals know how to make that happen. And I think that's the goal. And I agree with you that I think people write as a form of self-care, trying to work through their issues. And, anecdotally, I've heard from a lot of health professionals who write, and they say that even though nothing has really changed, right? I mean, the patient is still sick or dying, they still have all the problems they had going into it, that they feel better for having done that.
Right.
Well, we know that the syndrome is very similar to post-traumatic distress syndrome. Mm-hmm. So it's like going to war and having shells come at you and people wanting to kill you and horrible things happening to your colleagues and having to stand up and be courageous in the face of knowing that you're going to die. And I would think that that analogy is appropriate. And even more an analogy would be that burnout is common. It happens in truck drivers, it happens in airplane pilots, it happens in lawyers, it happens in anybody who is so absorbed with their job. And we view our job as a noble profession. Well, certainly post-traumatic stress syndrome, defending your country and your loved ones is a noble profession. And so 40 years ago, burnout was formally described, and we're dealing with it daily in the medical profession and outside the medical profession. And so that these stresses that occur are represented in this anthology are widespread in society. And it's not just our society, it's around the world.
Thank you. Thank you both very much for these comments. So, one last question for my co-editors here. Johanna, and why don't you go first? Has this book impacted you in such a way? Has it changed you? Has it changed your life? What you think, what you feel, what you think about your profession? Has it had any impact on you?
I love the opportunity to reflect on that question. I would say first, just the fact that we created such an interdisciplinary collaboration of a physician oncologist, a psychologist, and a poet was really a wonderful experience because it brought that interdisciplinarity, those different perspectives all together on a shared project. And personally, I really loved that. I think from the poetry and writings themselves that were submitted, it just gave me a renewed respect and gratitude for the health professionals that I work with every day. Did give me a window, a deeper window into their suffering and their anxieties. And just like going back to Frank's poem, it just made me want to hug them, even though that wasn't possible for a long time.
Thank you. Frank?
My reaction has been very personal because I've lived a pretty challenging life even before medical school and survived many life-threatening episodes, which I will not take time to explain. And so it made me very skeptical about people when they were not resilient. And so it's sensitized me more to the care of myself and of others, and certainly my colleagues who have had to endure frontline this COVID catastrophe.
Thank you both very much for all of those comments. And I agree with Johanna's comment about the collaborative effort that this was and how it opened up my eyes as well. Little did I know about what these doctors feel, these other caregivers feel when they go home at night, when they have to face their family after a long, hard day. But there's enough writing in here about that particular moment. One of the poems in this book, by the way, that most touched me was a physician, a female physician who had just given birth. In fact, she gave birth during the lockdown. And she describes in her poem toward the end of the book how she nurses her baby at night while she's wearing a mask to make sure that she doesn't get her little girl ill, and how difficult it is to deal with patients and worry about, am I going to pick up something? Am I going to take it home to my family? Which, by the way, was a theme that was pretty much throughout the book, this fear of am I hurting my family while I am doing my duty and helping save the lives of others? Am I imperiling my own family's life? So a lot to understand and appreciate, as both of our co-editors say, regarding the medical profession. And I am very, very happy that we had this opportunity. So this is the book, have an inside look at how our caregivers, as they work hard to save our lives and to get our society back into health and normalcy. These are the feelings, the fears, the experiences that they had during the second year of COVID. And it's here for us all to know, to understand, and to appreciate. So, Dr. Poets and other healers, COVID in their own words. And to me, that subtitle is one of the most important parts of this book, COVID in their own words, Golden Foothills Press. And the book is available through goldenfoothillspress.com, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and your favorite bookstore. Just ask for it. And I thank you so much for having been here with us today. I thank my co-editors for all that they taught me and all that they helped me to enjoy in this project. I thank Armando Sanchez for bringing us on board. And we look forward to seeing you at other events. And thank you for supporting our book, our efforts, which in turn also help to support our caregivers by the understanding that we are helping to spread. Thank you all.